Guys, here we are. State of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago. This has come to this, and following the massacre that we had last night in Lavantil. You see, the thing is, a state of emergency is not nice. It's nothing good. It's really no fun. But this is what happens when you wait too long to address a problem. It's like any other thing else. When you have a health issue and you're saying, oh, my blood pressure is, well, doctor says it's a bit high. Okay, it's just a bit high. I'm not worried about that. And so you continue eating the same way, you continue doing the same thing, getting less sleep. It gets higher and higher and say, oh, it's just a little bit high. And then you get to a point where it's critical. You either die from some ruptured vein in your head, you get a stroke or something. And that's when you say, oh, I'll have to address the problem. You have diabetes. The doctor says your sugar level is a bit out of whack. Try and eat some different stuff. Change your diet a little bit. And you said, oh, it's just a little bit out of whack. And then it gets to a point where you have to chop off your limbs. It's the same with a country. And there's a problem. And those in authority fail to recognize the problem and think that they can play politics with it. This is what happens. And here we are today with a state of emergency because crime has gone out of control in Trinidad. You saw what happened last night in Lavantil after the massacre. That's the headline all around the world. Trinidad and Tobago has made headlines, a state of emergency, not because the country is beautiful, not because we love going to Trinidad, not because this carnival is coming up, but because of a state of emergency, because of the massacre that took place last night in Lavantil. Guys, let me tell you something. But Trinidad and Tobago is not the only Caribbean country that will get a state of emergency. I believe soon many of them will get. You know why? When you had that CARICOM issue in Trinidad where the state spent $2 million to talk about crime as a public health, and you had the Prime Minister Simmons saying that the men are doing crime because, these guys want to mine high maintenance women, whatever foolishness he was talking. They talked about crime as a public health issue. The last public health issue we had was what? The pandemic, and there was state of emergency. Now is a state of emergency over crime. I'm not surprised if just now many of the other Caribbean islands end up with states of emergency, like St. Vincent. You're talking about a place where a guy was shot in the head, came home on holiday, shot in the head, tied hands and feet bound, placed in a vehicle, and the vehicle pushed over or driven over an embankment, whatever you want, however it occurred. But it's grimy all over the Caribbean, and I will not be surprised very soon if many of these Caribbean islands start calling states of emergency over crime. Let me tell you something. There's a video I have coming out this afternoon about why the Caribbean murder rate is so high, and you will not believe what's going on. Within hours of a massacre at Presgar Lands, Lavantil, the Prime Minister on Monday morning authorized the declaration of a state of emergency. Remember, we talked about what he was going to do recently in the last video I did? In a statement coming from the Ministry of Communication, citizens were told that the President, Christine Kanglo, on the advice of the Prime Minister, had declared the state of emergency, being satisfied the circumstances of Section 8(2)(c) of the Constitution exist. So we wait until we had more murders, declare state of emergency. We couldn't declare it before. We were seeing the trend. We were seeing where it's going. When it hit 600, it was time to state of emergency. Find these criminals, eliminate them from society, deal with this issue of gang warfare. But no, it wasn't good enough. We had to wait until we had a massacre last night to say, let's declare state of emergency. The circumstances warranting the declaration of the public emergency are based on the advice of TTPS to the National Security Council, criminal activity which endangers public safety. And that for a couple of years, it has been going like that. In Lavantil overnight, 5 men were gunned down in an apartment, the latest in a series of killings connected to gang warfare across the east-west corridor. In the president's proclamation, it was stated that I am satisfied that the public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of action that has been taken or is immediately threatened by the person of such in nature on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. The last time a state of emergency was declared in Trinidad and Tobago was in 2021 to allow for restrictions to fight the COVID-19 virus. I have heard Trinidadians just calling for something to be done quickly about the issue of crime and what was taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. A state of emergency is no fun. all your civil liberties, your rights and you will see how they'll be taken away quickly in a state of emergency. You won't be able to move around. And let me get into that right now and tell you what a state of emergency is all about. Because you need to know it's not fun and games. Let's go into that. Let's go in and see if we can find out what a state of emergency is. Now, based on what they're saying here, state of emergency. A state of emergency derived from a governmental declaration made in response to an extraordinary situation posing a fundamental threat to the country. The declaration may suspend certain normal functions of the government, may alert citizens to their normal behavior, or may authorize government agencies to implement emergency preparedness plans, as well as to limit or suspend civil liberties and human rights. So, states of emergencies are no fun. They can limit or suspend civil liberties and your human rights. You're moving about, you're going to where you want to go to freely with nobody stopping you. It can happen in a state of emergency. You have to go to your bed early now. From 11 o'clock, they say get off the streets by 7. You may have things to do at 7 o'clock. And this is what I'm talking about. So there's no fun and games when it comes to state. People think it's all fun and games. There are no fun and games in emergency. What are the key components of state of emergency? Well, guess what? States of emergency have two components. Legal framework consisting of a constitutional legislative basis for the state of emergency, and an operational framework involving the organizational structure and the strategic plans for dealing with the state of emergency. So while separate, these components be compatible. In other words, the legal framework must take into account operational requirements, and operational requirements must respect the legal framework, including international law. So the implementation of the emergency law leads to restrictions on normal economic, civil, or political activity in order to address the extraordinary circumstances that have given rise to the emergency situation. The question is, what is it that's coming up in Trinidad and Tobago? There's carnival, there's elections coming up. You hear what they said? The emergency invariably leads to the restrictions of normal economic, civil, or political activity. A lot of things and rights, your rights as a citizen. I believe by this afternoon, you will know what all is going on in terms of the state of emergency. And when I say what's going on, I'm talking about what times you may have to get off the street, what it all implement. Of course, we're hearing from former commissioner of police, I think it was Gary, saying that the SA will solve nothing. That's what he said. The former National Security Minister and Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith, says the state of emergency was not going to solve the rising crime rate in Trinidad and Tobago. He says the state of emergency was not going to solve the rising crime rate in Trinidad and Tobago. It was a stopgap measure and should not be used as a crime fighting tool. Griffith was responding to this morning's announcement by the Ministry of Communications that the President, on the advice of the Prime Minister, had declared. He said, if it is true that the state of emergency has been called because of an escalation in crime, it again shows the double standard and hypocrisy of the government, because I recall when the People's Partnership Administration called a state of emergency because of a similar concern, they attacked the government and stated that the state of emergency should not be used as a crime fighting tool. So we're going to go back and forth with this. It's going to cause a lot of enmity between political rivals and so on and so forth. But guys, at the end of the day, like I said to you, this is an issue that we all need to pay attention to. I'm going to follow it. I'm going to give you the information later as to what's taking place, and I mean what it all entails when the government details that for the nation. Take it easy, guys, and subscribe.